which means it's an absolute wasteland. There's not, you're terrified until you see Dustin. But between then, absolutely frightening. But what we're talking about here is this universal quality that we've just heard the minister talk about. We picked it up in Sandeep's music. We see it when we look at great pieces of art, and it's transformational. And it can be any kind of art. And Sabine, I know you've done some amazing things, and maybe it's the best place to start because I think it illustrates that even surprising art forms can have extremely powerful impacts. We've only got about 25 minutes here, so we're going to try and keep this moving. But can you very briefly talk a little bit about how you used your art form in the face of some of the greatest, scariest challenges that this region faces?
Cool. So I'm a clown and a storyteller. And what I do is I go to places, to refugee camps, to places where, I work with disadvantaged communities, and I take my clown and I perform and welcome people wherever they are. And we do some clown workshops where people can really find laughter and joy and find life again find the simplest things, the joy of life and laughter. We also look for stories and what connects us really as human beings, no matter where we are, no matter what we're going through. We all share the same stories deep down, but we just need to find these stories. We also fight extremism with culture. So this is briefly what we do, and we've been in different places around the world, and the last thing, we've been working a lot with Syrian refugees in Lesbos or in Lebanon and Jordan, collecting stories, clowning around, and just sharing these stories with the world.
So Richard, clowning around, we sometimes think of the arts as a very elevated thing, And yet clowning around suggests that there is something of finding the child in us that actually works. And I'm wondering if that's part of the formula that gives art this universal power.
I think to the degree that you can be an unprejudiced and inquisitive person, which if you're lucky can last for a long time in your own life, then being childlike is a good aspiration. The moment comes when it doesn't solve everything, but it's a happy way to approach, I think, understanding oneself better. And then as you say, it's also a way to discover connections with other people.
Well, that's it. It's getting into getting past the artifice of adulthood and culture and into something that touches us more deeply and actually motivates us. And it's touching that place that motivates us that makes this so powerful, right?
I have a taste for the artifice also. I think it's important that we recognize one another's achievement as different civilizations. And frequently those kinds of ancient and even newly developed values allow yourself to present yourself differently. And I think it's crucial in our thrust towards being global that we recognize we are different from one another.
Okay, well, Cynthia just wrote an article for one of the world's most important journals. Anybody want to take a guess?
Starts with an F.
Starts with an F and ends with a P. Right. But you were talking about something that relates to this, which is how you can use the power of television to combat extremism. And so maybe you talk a little about that.
It's really, to pick up on a lot of themes here, it's the power of stories and the power of narrative. And just to pick up on what you were saying in the beginning, David, it is so crazy that arts and culture is not a bigger part of the political world. That's why I'm so glad you're here, because it is the most powerful tool. It pulls these stories, narratives, pull in our emotions, and they create empathy. And that's what you need to move anything. So what I wrote about, it has to do also with what you said, Richard, about difference. What I wrote about is actually a fantastic initiative It has many partners. It is one of the leaders is Ali Jaber, who's the head of the NBC group here, media group in Dubai. It also involves the State Department and some private partners. And this is the positive development of an initial not so great counter-extremism strategy, which involved the think again, turn away, and all these ideas of the State Department creating narratives. This was a very bad idea. And what eventually they came to was using the storytelling power of American television and filmmakers. I'm sorry, everyone else, but America really does make really good stories on TV and film. And using that, all the stories may not be great, but the capacity to create a good story is absolutely there. And this was recognized. And so what is coming together are showrunners and TV writers from Hollywood are mentoring Arab writers, TV writers and TV creators, both in Hollywood and also here in the Middle East. The Hollywood people are coming here, and a very important point that Ali Jaber made was, we don't need your stories. We've got our stories. We want to tell our stories in the best way possible to counter, of course, the other narrative, the seductive, horrendous, but horrendously seductive stories coming out of ISIS. And humor is a huge part in this. With anybody in this region knows the wildly successful show Selfie, which is a parody of ISIS and extremism, and sometimes very serious one as well. So it's a great marriage of the American storytelling capacity, but with Arab stories.
So, Dustin, you're an artist who has created some magnificent works, but I think one of the great works that you've created is not just your works of art, but what you're doing at Pioneer Works, and how you are using the intersection between the arts and another universal connector, which is science and technology, and to expand the influence of both, to explore new boundaries with both. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
I don't know.
Okay. Let's go to Sabine then.
I'll give it a try.
Okay. All right.
Well, I think civilizations, is a sculpture. I think everything that we see, we've invented and we've built over a period of thousands of years. And I'd like to continue that thought as a civilization, that storytelling is something we do with art, with film, with religion, with state, with race. These are all weird ways we've sort of attributed meaning to the way we perceive and understand our lives. And with Pioneer Works, I sort of classically make sculptures, but I'd rather be talking to a physicist or a biologist. On Sundays, I practice guitar, and I've found, the head of our science department plays piano, and so most of my friends that are professional musicians are Sunday painters. So I think that this idea that one is only one thing is bananas, and it starts to box us. And I think that our practices can be expanded by trying these new things and by coming together across all these different lines to critically think together about how this sculpture, this civilization can progress into this new age. And with that is technology. And I don't think of science as not being part of culture. I think they're the same thing.
Well, I think you get to a very, very important point, and it gets to this issue of universality. I grew up, my dad was a scientist at Bell Telephone Laboratories, and the scientists would come over, and the same thing happened on the weekends. The physicists and the mathematicians were all violinists and pianists also. And they were working during the week trying to explore new boundaries in the universe, and they were using the violin and the piano to tell the stories of what they found and to express what they found in their lives. And what I'm hearing as a kind of a universal theme here is storytelling and the power of storytelling, because it gets to who we are. Now, Richard, you have been here working on a museum project, and in fact there are galleries here that give some preview into that museum project. And I think maybe we should take it a step further. Does a museum help tell the story, and what is the story you're trying to tell with this project?
Well, museums are living repositories for those achievements. Some of them are narrative and some of them are non-narrative. So we have to accommodate both of those things. And here, in particular, at Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, we took as our challenge looking at the world from the formative years of UAE in the late 1960s until the present, assembling a collection and presenting work by artists from around the world. So we argue that this will be the most successful, the most daring, and the most comprehensive contemporary art museum dating from about 1965 until the present in the world. So it's a big ambition.
And how do you think the impact of a museum like that, what do you think the impact of a museum like that will have in a region like this?
I think it'll be catalytic. We heard this morning from the minister that the population is young. We see in a demonstrable way that young people typically have a deep interest in contemporary art. So I think it'll be informative, catalytic, and we hope finally a way to bring people together.
Okay, well, let me get back to the practical here a second, because Sabine, you said something that may have been a little bit of a throwaway that I don't know if other people picked up on, but you said we use clowning to help combat extremism. How do you do that?
Well, by taking arts to places where you know, where there are a lot of extremism, or we take culture there. We did a project in the north of Lebanon where the Nusra Front comes and recruits people in cafes, and we basically turned all the cafes there into cultural cafes where we'd made performances, clowning, storytelling by the guys who are usually recruited by these people. And then, so it was a month of like, yeah, this is us fighting extremism.
So it
with
was
culture.
it was clowns versus terrorists
Yeah,
in a cafe.
it was great. It was a great combination.
That's a movie. For those of you who are in the movie bit, that's a movie, folks. Clowns versus terrorists. And
I mean, we managed to save 21 guys from being recruited, but then, I mean, there are a lot of more people who are being recruited, so, but
well, but
that's
you know,
one small thing.
but you know, that's, again, when we go into our workshops, we talk about what we can do. There is an issue of scale. And, you know, I have a friend who says sometimes, if you change one person, you change the world. You know, because if you take 21 people who might have been a terrorist, think of what they might have done, think of what the implications. And so we don't always have to do things on a grand scale
of course,
to have a real impact. Now, you were in the diplomatic service, and you made a comment a moment ago about, you know, storytelling in the State Department, which sounds, by the way, like a terrible idea for a movie.
The movies they made were pretty bad.
That's one. No one would go to that movie. But you know, when you hear about these kinds of initiatives, you know, objectively speaking, doesn't it seem like there is more power to this than there are to a lot of the more formal state-to-state initiatives?
Well, as you know, I agree violently with you, and after
That's why you're here. We only have invited people that violently agree with me.
Actually, after I served as ambassador to the Netherlands, which I did 1998 to 2001, as an art historian who'd done 17th century Dutch art, and of course I did a lot with culture. I didn't actually know anything about diplomacy and international affairs. I learned that fast. That's what professors do. But I discovered that culture worked really effectively in diplomacy, and number two, that the State Department doesn't pay much attention to it. So I came back to Georgetown, where I'd been teaching before, and I thought, well, can I change the State Department? No, but maybe I can have an impact on the people going into it from Georgetown School of Foreign Service, which is one of the main training places for people in international affairs. So I've started there with my theater colleague, Derek Goldman, something called the Laboratory for Global Performance and Politics. And our mission is to humanize global politics through the power of performance. So expose these young, brilliant people who want to go into international careers, not just to the strategic interest pieces on the chessboard, but to what people's real lives are. And how can they find that? From seeing theater productions from the different regions. So we've had productions from Pakistan, from Palestine, from Iraq, from China, you know, as many places as we can afford, and try to expose people to these narratives from the places, you know, that where the problems are actually taking place. The other side of it is to empower the artists. So the theater artists in Georgetown are put together with the international affairs people, and they solve problems together, and we get people to stand up and act in international affairs classes. So they learn each other's skills. And I am, you know, hopeful and sort of wildly optimistic that over time, maybe we can change both these fields, get American theater a little out of its box, and humanize people going into foreign policy. They want to do this. You know, the students gravitate to it like crazy. They don't want to only learn how to kill people. And they want to learn examples of where culture works. And I'm just going to give one other example that relates to music.
Very briefly, because we got...
Yeah. And that's in Mali, the most dangerous mission of the UN today, where in Timbuktu, when I have my colleague Mani Ansar here from the Timbuktu Renaissance, music is what brings people together. Music has always brought people together. It's what brings the northern Malians and the southern Malians together. And what is desperately needed, and we hope to bring back, is actual concerts and festivals in the north of Mali to bring the people back together, and then the peacemakers will make peace.
Okay, so I think there's a theme here, an interesting theme that I hope we pick up on later, because it ties to what Richard has talked about, and Sabine has talked about, and Cynthia has talked about, and indirectly also to what you have talked about, and that is that the arts are not just something for seats of luxury. The arts are not just something for the big capitals with rich people pulling up in their cars and looking at it. There's a place for the arts on the front line. There's a place for the arts in the middle of the conflict zone where it can really make a difference. I mean, is that part of the rationale behind what you're doing?
Well, I think we were hoping this wouldn't be a front line.
Well, in the midst, yes, I think we all share that hope. But I mean by that, in the midst of a region of turmoil.
Look, it always helps when people can talk about metaphors and not broken promises and treaties and violations of territory. So to the degree that we can offer important, engaging metaphors, I think that's our role.
Right, and bringing it to the place where the metaphors are needed is what it's about. And so that leads me to a question. You know, what Pioneer Works does is amazing, and I've been there, and it's a really remarkable, inspiring place because of the intersection of these worlds. Can that work someplace other than Brooklyn, which is its own unique ecosystem, which hopefully will never be replicated anywhere else? But I mean, is this something that can be exported?
I think so. I think we're investigating that now. I think we're sort of building a template for a 22nd century community center where the ingredients are, you have to have a recording studio.
22nd century?
Yeah, we're looking
How
ahead.
old are you going to be?
I don't know. Well, you know, with all this new regenerative medicine, I got to prepare. But
That's what, he's a visionary. That's
you have to be ready. But I think the ingredients are, you have a technology lab where you have AR and VR and 3D printing and robotics, and you have a recording studio, and you have a small museum or exhibition space, and you have a residency program, and you have classrooms and a radio station. You have all of, you have basically ingredients that equal this thing, that if all of these things exist in one place and are completely accessible to everyone, you can have that in a township in Africa, you can have that anywhere.
And that's, you know, if there's a theme, if there's one thing to take away from this particular panel, it's if you take the basics, the universals, storytelling, touching people, metaphor, the kinds of things that even artifice and understanding cultural differences and distinctions, and you can apply them where they're needed the most. You can have a completely different kind of consequence of art and culture than what we normally talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, a great panel discussion, quick, and I hope you will speak with each of them as we go through the next couple of days, but really, really touch some essential points. Please join me in thanking each of these panels for a terrific job.